What if I told you that the daughter my parents called too practical for big dreams just left them speechless at my graduation ceremony, while they spent years investing in my sister's debate tournaments? I was quietly building something that would make them question everything they thought they knew about success. This is the story of how being ignored became my greatest advantage. Today was supposed to be about celebration, caps flying in the air, proud parents cheering the whole 9 yards. But for me, Bella Carter, it was something else entirely. It was the moment I'd been waiting for my whole life, my quiet revenge. I'm standing here in my graduation gown watching my parents in the audience. Dad's checking his phone. Mom's looking around like she's already planning her exit strategy. They have no idea what's about to happen. No clue that their practical daughter, the one they basically wrote off, is about to flip their entire world upside down. You see, my parents left me speechless at this ceremony, but not in the way you'd think. Let me take you back to where it all started. Suburban Chicago, picture-perfect neighborhood, white picket fences, the works. The Carter family looked perfect from the outside. My dad, Robert, insurance executive, always in a pressed shirt. My mom, Ellen, real estate agent, obsessed with keeping up appearances. And then there were the daughters. Grace, my younger sister by 2 years, was everything parents dream of. Graceful, literally and figuratively. Outgoing, popular, the kind of kid who could walk into any room and instantly become the center of attention. She had this effortless charm that made adults melt. Then there was me, the quiet one, the weird one. While Grace was practicing her talent show routine, I was in my room taking apart old electronics, trying to figure out how they worked. While she was at sleepovers, I was teaching myself to code on our ancient family computer. Christmas morning tells you everything you need to know about our family dynamic. Grace would unwrap the latest iPad designer clothes art supplies for her creative development, my gifts, library gift cards, and practical stuff, a scientific calculator, a sturdy backpack. When I asked why Grace always got the expensive tech stuff, Mom would give me that practice smile and say, "You're more practical, honey. Grace needs encouragement to find her path. You already know what you want." But here's the thing they never understood. I didn't need encouragement. I needed recognition. I needed someone to see that the quiet kid tinkering in her bedroom was actually building something incredible. The only person who ever really saw me was Grandma Vivian, Dad's mom. She'd slip me $20 and whisper, "Keep building, sweetheart. The world needs more girls like you." She was the only one who believed that my weird obsession with computers might actually lead somewhere. Everyone else? They just saw me as the low-maintenance daughter who didn't need anything. How wrong they were. High school hit, and the divide between Grace and me became a freaking canyon. Grace joined the debate team and absolutely killed it. Regional championship, state finals, the whole deal. Every weekend, my parents would pack up the car, drive hours to watch her compete, cheering from the front row, like she was performing at Madison Square Garden. Meanwhile, I was winning science fairs. Not just participating, winning. I built a water purification system that actually worked, created an app that helped students with learning disabilities, even got my robotics project featured in the local paper. But when presentation day came, empty seats where my parents should have been. We had to drive Grace to her debate tournament. Mom would explain later, barely looking up from her phone. "You understand, right? You're so independent." Independent. That word became their excuse for everything. When I turned 16, I got a job at Radio Shack. Yeah, Radio Shack tells you how long ago this was. But I loved it. I was finally around people who spoke my language, who got excited about circuit boards and processors. I started saving every penny, not for clothes or concerts like other kids, but for better computer equipment. At night, after homework and work, I'd stay up coding, teaching myself Python, JavaScript, building little programs that solved actual problems. I found these online communities where developers shared ideas, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But when I tried to share my excitement at home, Dead silence. When I showed my parents a program I'd built that could organize their client files more efficiently, Dad patted my head and said, "That's nice, sweetie. Maybe you can work in IT someday." Like I was destined to be the person who fixes printers. Meanwhile, Grace needed private debate coaching. $500 a month. Grace needed a new laptop for research. $800. Grace needed to attend a summer leadership camp in California. $3,000. Every expense was an investment in her future. When I asked for $200 for a coding boot camp, Dad actually laughed. Sweetheart, programming is risky. It's not a stable career path like law or politics. Grace has more practical ambitions. Practical. The word that haunted my entire childhood was being used to describe Grace's dreams, while mine were called risky. The irony was suffocating. Senior year arrived like a freight train, and suddenly, everything was about college applications. Grace and I were both shooting for top schools, but the experience couldn't have been more different. Grace had a team. Mom helped research programs. Dad paid for SAT prep courses. They hired a college consultant to polish her essays. Her applications were like professional marketing packages. Me, I filled everything out alone, staying up until 2 a.m. researching scholarship opportunities and financial aid options. I applied to 12 schools, each application fee coming out of my Radio Shack savings. But here's the thing. I was actually doing better academically. Perfect GPA, killer test scores, extracurriculars that showed real impact. While Grace was impressive, I was exceptional. Not that anyone at home noticed. The acceptance letters started rolling in around March. Grace got into Northwestern with a partial scholarship. Good school, respectable program. My parents were over the moon. Then my letters came. MIT waitlist. Heartbreaking, but still impressive. University of Illinois, full ride for computer science. University of Chicago with partial aid. Carnegie Mellon with a decent package. I'll never forget the dinner where everything changed. We were celebrating Grace's Northwestern acceptance when I mentioned my University of Chicago acceptance. "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, cutting her chicken like we were discussing the weather. "Of course, you know we can only afford to help one of you with college expenses." The room went dead silent, except for the sound of silverware on plates. Dad cleared his throat. "We've talked about this extensively, and we think Grace has the better long-term potential. Debate politics, maybe law school down the line. It's a clearer path to success." Grace stopped eating. Even she looked uncomfortable. "Your computer stuff is impressive," Mom continued, "but it's not as stable. Grace needs our support more than you do. You've always been so self-sufficient." There it was again. Self-sufficient. Independent. All the words they used to make abandonment sound like a compliment. I sat there looking at my family around our dining room table, and something inside me crystallized. Not anger, something colder than that. Determination. "Okay," I said quietly. "I understand." But I didn't understand. I was done understanding. I was done being the easy daughter who never asked for anything. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. If they wanted to bet against me, fine. I'd show them exactly how wrong they were. September rolled around, and while Grace was moving into her cozy dorm room with Mom and Dad helping her decorate, I was loading my stuff into a beat-up Honda Civic heading to a shared apartment 45 minutes from campus. The place was a dump. 3 bedrooms, paper-thin walls, a kitchen that probably violated several health codes. My roommates were Sarah, a pre-med student who lived on energy drinks, and Marcus, an art major who painted at all hours of the night. But you know what? It was mine. Well, 1/3 mine, but still. The first month was brutal. I was taking 18 credit hours working at a campus coffee shop in the mornings and doing freelance web design at night. My alarm went off at 5 a.m. every day. Coffee shop shift until noon, classes until 6, then coding until midnight. Rinse and repeat. But here's where things got interesting. In my advanced computer science class, there was this teaching assistant named Ethan, grad student, probably 24, with this quiet intensity that reminded me of myself. He noticed I was always the first one finished with assignments, always pushing beyond what was required. After class, one day he pulled me aside. You know what you're doing with these algorithms is pretty impressive. Have you thought about building something real with these skills? That question changed everything. Ethan had this idea for an educational technology platform, something that could help students who were struggling academically find personalized learning paths. He'd been sketching out concepts for months, but needed someone who could actually build it. Want to work on this together? He asked. I can't pay you, but if we build something good, it could be huge. I looked at this guy, this grad student who saw potential in me that my own family couldn't see, and I said yes without hesitation. We called it Pathlight. The idea was simple. Students input their learning style, their struggles, their goals, and the app would create customized study plans and connect them with resources. But the execution, that was all code, all problem solving, all the stuff I'd been teaching myself for years. Meanwhile, Grace was posting Instagram stories from her dorm showing off her fully stocked mini fridge and her study group pizza parties. Mom would comment on every single post with heart emojis and, "So proud of my girl." Nobody asked how I was doing. By second semester, I was running on fumes and pure determination. My daily fuel was essentially coffee and spite, which turned out to be surprisingly effective. The coffee shop job was killing me, so I quit and picked up more freelance work. Building websites for local businesses, fixing database issues for small companies. Word of mouth spread, and suddenly I had more work than I could handle. I was making more money than some of my professors. But the real breakthrough came in my data science class. Professor Williams assigned a semester-long project analyzing student performance data to identify at-risk students. While everyone else was using basic statistical models, I built a machine learning algorithm that could predict academic struggles with 87% accuracy. When I presented it, the room went silent. Then, Professor Williams started asking questions, real questions, the kind you ask when you're genuinely impressed. Other students were taking notes on my methodology. 2 weeks later, I won the university's Innovation in Technology Award. $500 and a plaque that said my name in actual gold lettering. I called my parents to share the news. "That's nice, sweetheart," Mom said, distracted. "Hold on. Grace is calling about her debate tournament results." I hung up and stared at that plaque for a long time. But Ethan was there. Ethan understood what this meant. "You're not just good at this," he told me over terrible cafeteria coffee. "You're exceptional. We need to take Pathlight seriously." So we did. Nights and weekends, we turned my tiny bedroom into a startup headquarters. Ethan handled the education theory and user experience design while I built the entire technical infrastructure. By the end of freshman year, we had a working prototype that actually helped students improve their grades. More importantly, I had something my family never gave me, a partner who believed in my potential. Sophomore year started with a bang. Professor Halston, head of the computer science department, called me into his office during the first week of classes. "Bella," he said, leaning back in his chair, "I've been watching your work. The Innovation Award, your project portfolios, the feedback from other faculty. I want to nominate you for the University Research Grant Program." I almost fell out of my chair. The research grant was serious money, $10,000 to pursue an independent project with faculty mentorship. It was the kind of opportunity that launched careers. "But," he continued, "you'll need to present a comprehensive proposal, something that demonstrates real-world impact and commercial viability." Pathlight. This was our moment. Ethan and I spent 2 weeks crafting the perfect proposal. We had data showing that students using our beta version improved their GPAs by an average of 0.8 points. We had testimonials from the 50 students who tested the platform. We had a business model that could scale. When I presented to the grant committee, something magical happened. These professors, these academics, who'd seen thousands of student projects, were genuinely excited. They asked follow-up questions, wanted to see technical demos, talked about potential partnerships with other universities. I got the grant. But here's the crazy part. While I was building something that could change education, my parents still had no idea what I was actually doing. Their updates about me to relatives were always vague. Bella's doing well in school. You know how she is with computers. Grace, meanwhile, was making Dean's List and getting features in the Northwestern student newspaper for her debate performances. Every family dinner conversation was about her latest achievement, her internship applications, her bright future in politics. By Christmas of sophomore year, Pathlight had over 1,000 active users across 3 different universities. Students were messaging us, saying the app helped them pass classes. They were failing, helped them find study groups, helped them feel less alone in their academic struggles. We were quietly changing lives, and nobody in my family had a clue. That winter break, I sat in my childhood bedroom looking at usage statistics on my laptop while Grace held court in the living room, entertaining relatives with stories from college. I realized something profound. I didn't need their recognition anymore. I was building something bigger than their approval. But that didn't mean I was done proving them wrong. Not even close. Senior year was when everything I'd been building in the shadows finally started breaking into the light, whether my family noticed or not. March brought news that still gives me chills thinking about it. Dean Morrison called me into her office with an expression I couldn't read. "Bella," she said, gesturing for me to sit down, "the faculty has voted and we'd like you to deliver this year's graduation address for the School of Engineering and Applied Sciences." I literally asked her to repeat herself. The graduation speaker. Me? The girl whose parents forgot to show up to science fairs was being asked to speak to thousands of people about success and achievement. But that wasn't even the biggest shock. 2 days later, I got another call. Not only was I graduating summa cum laude, I was valedictorian of the entire business and technology division. 4.0 GPA, highest in the program's history. Meanwhile, Grace was also preparing to graduate from Northwestern. Political science, major, decent grade, solid, but not spectacular. She'd done well, don't get me wrong, but her GPA was hovering around 3.2. Respectable, but hardly exceptional. The difference in how our families handled our upcoming graduations was like watching 2 completely different movies. Grace's graduation became a family production. Mom and Dad planned a huge pre-graduation dinner, invited aunts, uncles, cousins, family friends. They rented out a private dining room at some fancy restaurant in Chicago, catered menu, professional photographer, the works. 3 days before the event, I got a text from Mom. Not a call, a text. "Hey honey, we're having a little celebration for Grace's graduation Friday night. You should come if you're free." If I was free, like I might have something better to do than celebrate my own sister's graduation. I showed up to this little celebration to find 30 people toasting Grace's bright future in politics. Speeches about her debate achievements, her leadership potential, her networking skills. Dad stood up with a champagne glass and talked about how proud he was to have raised such an accomplished daughter. Singular, daughter. I sat at the end of the table, wearing a dress I'd bought at Target, watching my family celebrate my sister, while completely ignoring the fact that I was graduating too. With honors. As valedictorian. After building a company that was actually making money. But, you know what? I wasn't even angry anymore. I was calm. I was ready. Graduation morning arrived gray and cloudy, which felt appropriate for the dramatic showdown I knew was coming. I put on my simple black gown, pinned my honor cords in place, and looked at myself in the mirror. No family help getting ready, no photo session, no fuss. Just me, preparing for what would either be the most embarrassing or most satisfying day of my life. The ceremony was held at the United Center, the same place where the Bulls play. Thousands of graduates, tens of thousands of family members. The energy was electric, except in my little corner of the universe where everything felt strangely quiet. I found my family in the audience as graduates were lining up. Mom, Dad, and Grace, who'd driven down from Northwestern for the ceremony. They were sitting about halfway up, Dad already looking at his watch like he had somewhere else to be. Grace spotted me first and came running over. She wrapped me in a huge hug that caught me completely off guard. "Bella, I'm so proud of you," she whispered in my ear. "I know I don't say it enough, but you're incredible. What you've accomplished? It's amazing." For a second, just a second, I felt that old familiar hope creep in. Maybe things could be different. Maybe today would be the day my family finally saw me. Then I noticed Mom and Dad weren't coming over. They waved from their seats, Mom giving me a thumbs up like I was performing in a middle school play. The ceremony began with the usual pomp and circumstance. Hundreds of names called diplomas handed out, families cheering. When they called my name, I heard Grace whooping from the audience. My parents clapped politely. I walked across that stage, shook the president's hand, and took my diploma. Just another graduate in a sea of black gowns. But then something happened that wasn't in the program. After all the degrees were conferred, after all the caps were thrown in the air, President Harrison stepped back up to the microphone. "Before we conclude today's ceremony," he announced, his voice echoing through the arena, "I'd like to take a moment to recognize some exceptional achievements by our graduating students." I was heading toward the exit with everyone else when I heard my name boom across the sound system. Would Bella Carter please return to the stage? Every head in my row turned to look at me. I felt my face go bright red as I pushed through the crowd back toward the stage with no idea what was happening. President Harrison was smiling as I climbed the steps. Behind him, Dean Morrison and Professor Halston were standing with what looked like several additional awards. "Ladies and gentlemen," the president announced, "Bella Carter represents the very best of what our university stands for. Not only is she graduating as valedictorian of our School of Engineering and Applied Sciences with a perfect 4.0 GPA, but her achievements extend far beyond the classroom." I could see my parents in the audience now, Dad's mouth literally hanging open, Mom gripping Grace's arm. During her time here, Bella founded and built Pathlight Educational Technologies, a startup that has secured over $200,000 in funding and currently employs 5 of her fellow students. The crowd was murmuring now. This wasn't normal graduation ceremony stuff. Her company's innovative approach to personalized learning has been adopted by over 15 universities nationwide, helping thousands of students improve their academic performance. I glanced at my family again. Grace was crying, actually crying, clapping as hard as she could. My parents looked like they'd been hit by a truck. Furthermore, Bella is this year's recipient of the National Education Technology Innovation Award, recognizing her as one of the top student entrepreneurs in the country. The applause was building now, people starting to stand up. And finally, President Harrison continued, pausing for dramatic effect. "Bella has been awarded a full scholarship to pursue her MBA at Stanford University's Graduate School of Business, where she'll be continuing her work in educational technology." The arena erupted. Students were cheering, families were clapping, and I was standing on stage in front of 15,000 people, feeling like I was having an out-of-body experience. Stanford MBA, full ride, after building a company that was actually changing lives. I looked out at my family one more time. Grace was standing up, cheering louder than anyone. Dad was staring at me like he was seeing me for the first time in his life. And Mom had her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. 25 years of being invisible, of being the practical daughter who didn't need encouragement, of being told my dreams were too risky. And now the whole world could see exactly what they'd missed. The moment I stepped off that stage, chaos erupted around me. Faculty members I'd never spoken to were shaking my hand, congratulating me on achievements they'd apparently been tracking that I didn't even know they knew about. Professor Martinez from the business school was talking about guest lecturing opportunities. Dean Morrison was introducing me to alumni who wanted to discuss potential partnerships. Then came the recruiters. Apparently, word about Pathlight had been spreading in tech circles way beyond what Ethan and I realized. Companies I'd only dreamed of working for were handing me business cards, talking about innovation labs and entrepreneur in residence programs. "We've been following your company's growth," this woman from Microsoft told me. "We'd love to discuss acquisition possibilities or perhaps bringing you on to lead our education technology division." I was standing there holding a stack of business cards from Fortune 500 companies, feeling like I was living in someone else's life. That's when I saw my parents pushing through the crowd, looking completely lost. Mom reached me first, her makeup smudged from crying. "Bella, honey, why didn't you tell us about any of this?" I looked at her, this woman who'd spent 25 years treating my achievements like background noise, and I felt this strange calm settle over me. "You weren't listening," I said simply. "I stopped talking." Dad stepped up, his face red with what I couldn't tell was embarrassment or anger. "But a company, Bella, you started a real company and never mentioned it." "I mentioned it plenty," I replied, my voice steady. "Remember sophomore year when I tried to show you my app? You said maybe I could work in IT someday. Remember when I won the Innovation Award, you put me on hold to take Grace's call about her debate tournament?" The silence between us was deafening despite the crowd noise around us. Grace appeared at Mom's shoulder, her eyes still red from crying. She looked at me with this expression I'd never seen before, like she was really seeing me for the first time. "Bella," she said quietly, "I owe you the biggest apology of my life." I raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious where this was going. All these years, I thought the way they treated us was normal. I thought you got less attention because you didn't need it, because you were so independent and self-sufficient. Her voice cracked. "I had no idea you were doing all this incredible stuff while I was just getting by." She grabbed my hands, and I could see she was fighting back more tears. "You were building a company, employing people, changing lives, and I didn't even notice. I was so wrapped up in my own world, getting all the attention and praise, and you were actually out here conquering the world in silence." For a moment, I felt that old familiar softness toward my sister. Grace wasn't malicious. She was just as much a product of our family dynamic as I was. "You were doing so much more than any of us realized," she continued, "and I'm ashamed that I never bothered to really ask about your life." Before I could respond, Ethan appeared at my elbow with Grandma Vivian leaning on his arm. My grandmother's eyes were sparkling with pride and something that looked like vindication. "There's my girl," she said, reaching up to cup my face in her weathered hands. "I always knew you were going to show them all." 2 hours later, we were sitting in some upscale restaurant Mom had picked for our celebration dinner. The irony wasn't lost on me that this was the first family dinner centered around my achievements in my entire life. The conversation was stilted and weird. Mom and Dad kept asking questions about Pathlight, like they were trying to cram 4 years of neglect into one meal. "So, how many employees do you have again?" Dad asked, cutting his steak with unnecessary precision. 5 full-time, 8 part-time contractors," I answered for the third time. "And the revenue? We're on track to hit $500,000 this year." Mom nearly choked on her wine. $500,000, Bella, that's more than your father made in his first 5 years at the insurance company." I wanted to point out that I'd been trying to tell them about the company's growth for 2 years, but Grace caught my eye and shook her head slightly. She was right. There was no point in rehashing everything now. That's when Uncle David showed up. Dad's older brother had always been the successful one in their family. Big law firm, expensive suits, the kind of guy who name-dropped clients at family barbecues. He slid into the booth next to Dad with his usual swagger. "Hey, heard there was a graduation celebration happening. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was murder coming from downtown." "Aye." He looked around the table, his eyes landing on me. "So, Bella heard you did pretty well today. What's your plan now?" "Job hunting." Before I could answer, Dad jumped in. "Actually, David Bella's got some pretty impressive things going on. She's starting Stanford Business School in the fall." "Stanford, nice. Good networking opportunities there." Uncle David was clearly only half listening, scrolling through his phone. "And she's got this technology company. Mom added her voice, carrying a pride that felt about 4 years too late. Uncle David's head snapped up. Company. What kind of company? Educational technology. I said simply. We build personalized learning platforms for college students. Huh, he said, putting his phone down. How big? About 500,000 in annual revenue, growing pretty quickly. Uncle David stared at me for a long moment, then turned to my dad with this incredulous expression. Rob, are you telling me your daughter built a $500,000 company while she was in college and you never mentioned it? Not once I've been bragging about my kid making partner at his law firm and you've been sitting on this. The table went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in that noisy restaurant. David. Dad started, but his brother cut him off. No, seriously. In all our conversations about the kids, all the family updates, you never once mentioned that Bella started a successful business. What the hell, Rob? I watched my father's face cycle through about 5 different emotions before settling on something that looked like shame. We didn't really know the scope of what she was doing, Mom said quietly. Uncle David looked around the table like he was seeing us all clearly for the first time. You didn't know? How do you not know your own daughter started a company? I stood up, placing my napkin on the table with deliberate care. You know what, I'm going to head out. Ethan and the team are throwing a little celebration back at our office, and I want to be there. Bella, wait, Dad started, but I was already reaching for my purse. Thanks for dinner, I said, my voice perfectly calm. Congratulations again, Grace. I'm really proud of what you've accomplished. I kissed my grandmother on the cheek and whispered, Come visit me in California. Okay? As I walked away from that table, I heard Uncle David's voice carrying across the restaurant. Rob, you realize you just lost the most successful kid in this family, right? I didn't look back. For the first time in my life, I was walking toward people who actually understood my worth. So here I am, 1 year later, sitting in my corner office in Palo Alto, looking out at the Stanford campus where I'm halfway through my MBA program. Pathlight Educational Technologies now has 12 full-time employees and contractors spread across 3 states. We've got software engineers, education specialists, a marketing team, and even a customer success manager. What started as a late-night coding project in my tiny apartment has become a real company with real impact. Last month, I spoke at the National Education Technology Conference in front of 800 people. 800 educators, administrators, and tech leaders who wanted to hear about personalized learning platforms. Me, the girl who used to be too nervous to raise her hand in high school, giving keynote presentations. Our app is now being used by over 100 universities across the country. We've helped more than 50,000 students improve their academic performance, find study groups, and develop better learning strategies. When I get emails from students saying Pathlight helped them pass organic chemistry or finally understand calculus, I still get emotional. The best part, I'm not doing this alone anymore. I've started mentoring other young women in tech through Stanford's entrepreneurship program. Every month, I meet with a group of undergraduate women who are building their own startups, facing the same doubts and challenges I did. Just last week, I had coffee with Sarah, a sophomore who's building an app to help students manage mental health. She reminded me so much of myself at that age. Brilliant-driven, but convinced nobody would take her seriously. I don't know if I'm cut out for this, she told me, staring into her latte. My parents think I should focus on getting good grades and finding a stable job after graduation. I looked at this incredibly talented young woman and saw myself 4 years ago sitting in that same coffee shop, wondering if my dreams were too big or too risky. Let me tell you something, I said. The people who tell you to play it safe are usually the ones who never took any risks themselves. Don't let their fear become your ceiling. Living independently has taught me things about myself I never knew. I cook my own meals, pay my own bills, make my own decisions without having to justify them to anyone. I've traveled to conferences in cities I'd never seen, built relationships with people who value my mind, and my work created a life that's entirely my own design. Some evenings, I'll sit in my apartment with my laptop working on new features for Pathlight, and I'll think about that girl who used to hide in her bedroom coding in secret. She probably couldn't have imagined this life, but she built it anyway, one line of code at a time. 3 weeks ago, I got a letter in the mail. Actual snail mail, which nobody uses anymore in my mother's handwriting. I almost threw it away without opening it. After a year of minimal contact with my parents, I wasn't sure I was ready for whatever drama might be inside. But something made me sit down and read it. Dear Bella, it began. I've started this letter a dozen times and thrown it away. I don't know how to apologize for 25 years of not seeing you clearly. I had to put the letter down for a moment. This wasn't what I was expecting. Your father and I have spent this past year trying to understand how we could have been so blind to what you were building. We've read every article about your company, watched your conference presentations online, tried to piece together the incredible person you became while we weren't paying attention. The letter went on for 3 pages. Mom talked about her own childhood, how her parents always told her to be practical, to not dream too big. She admitted that she'd unconsciously passed those limitations on to me, while giving Grace the encouragement she never had herself. I realize now that when we called you independent and self-sufficient, we were really giving ourselves permission to ignore you. We told ourselves you didn't need our support because it was easier than admitting we didn't understand your dreams. The part that really got me was near the end. I know I can't undo the years when we should have been your biggest champions, but I want you to know that we talk about you every single day now. We tell everyone about our daughter who built a company that's changing education. We're so proud of you and so sorry it took us this long to say it. I cried reading that letter. Not because it fixed everything, but because it felt like my mom was finally meeting me where I am instead of where she thought I should be. The biggest surprise of this year, though, has been Grace. 6 months ago, she called me with an unexpected proposal. She'd finished her master's in communications and wanted to know if Pathlight needed help with outreach and partnerships. I know I don't have a tech background, she said, but I'm good with people and I understand the education space. Plus, I think it's time I actually supported what you're building instead of just cheering from the sidelines. Now, Grace is our director of university partnerships, and she's incredible at it. She has this natural ability to connect with administrators and faculty to explain the value of our platform in terms they understand. Last quarter, she secured partnerships with 15 new schools. Working with my sister has been healing in ways I didn't expect. She sees the business side of what we've built, understands the complexity, and the impact. For the first time in our lives, we're truly partners in something. Yesterday, Grace texted me a photo from a campus visit at Ohio State. She was standing next to a banner advertising a Pathlight study session, surrounded by students who'd used our app to form study groups. "Look at what you built," she wrote. "Look at all these students you're helping. I'm so proud to be part of this." You know, I used to think success would feel like proving my parents wrong, but it doesn't feel like that at all. It feels like proving myself right. It feels like finally becoming the person I always knew I could be, regardless of who was watching. My quiet revenge wasn't really revenge at all. It was just refusing to let anyone else define my potential. It was believing in myself when nobody else would, and building something meaningful with my own 2 hands. And that, it turns out, is the best kind of victory there is. Sometimes the best revenge is just living well and proving them wrong through your actions, not your words. Have you ever been underestimated by the people who should have believed in you most? Share your story in the comments below. I read every single one. And if you enjoyed this story of quiet strength and unexpected success, hit that subscribe button for more real-life drama that'll keep you hooked. Trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.